a high-performance digital education ecosystem, strategy, and organizational culture. And we have a few objectives for this workshop, which is about sharing of experience from institutional reviews on digitally enhanced learning and teaching, discussing self-assessment instruments, their benefits, their limits, and also generally organizing peers exchanges on how institutional self and external review can contribute to enhancing strategy and organizational culture. So without further ado, I will pass the floor for starting the first session, the opening session of this workshop, where you will hear a bit more about the projects, a bit more about the context, and already also a bit more about some research being done on self-assessment instruments. For that session, we have Michael Gebel. He's my director, actually. He's a director of the Higher Education Policy Unit at the UA. And we also have Irina Volonkiewicziene. I rehearsed, but I hope I pronounced your name correctly, the director of the Institute of Innovative Studies at Vytautas Magnus University in Lithuania. So Michael, I'll hand over the floor to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Therese. I've met most of you already before, so welcome to this workshop. As you see, it's a bit different probably than some of the events that you normally have. We deliberately decided to have this in a smaller format to enable more interaction, more discussion among the participants. This workshop is part of a series of events and activities that we run under the DIGIHE project and EU project, which we started in January 2020. As you know from these kind of projects, of course, we developed the project plan long time before and were not really in anticipation of how 2020 then would actually be. So that was a bit of a surprise, but I think we were quite well able to respond to the changes that happened then from early 2020 on. And it actually fit somehow the intention of our project, namely to encourage self-reflection on digitally enhanced learning and teaching at European higher education institutions, and to seek then on how to strengthen strategic approaches to digitally enhanced learning and teaching and capacity building. And this was suddenly, of course, on everybody's agenda. As you can see here, EUA does not do that all alone, but with a number of very able partners and also associate partners, and many of them join us actually here today. I should probably say a word about the title of this workshop, A High-Performance Digital Education Ecosystem, as this sounds really flashy. It's actually not our own lingo, but we took that from the EU's Digital Education Action Plan. You may remember it has been launched in December 2020, and it actually provides a kind of definition or a concept of what a high-performing digital education ecosystem should be. So this would include infrastructure, connectivity, and digital equipment, effective digital capacity building and development, including the organizational capabilities, and then also digitally competent and confident teachers and education and training staff. And of course, high level or high quality learning content, user friendliness, and all these important issues. We actually took this and used it also for one of the publications that we did. And on this, Irina will tell you a little bit more.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone participating today in this workshop. I fully agree with you, Michael, saying that at the time we started this activity in the project, we couldn't even estimate how much important it will become in the nearest future. And I'm saying this now with the confidence because more and more institutions are now request for guidance, for discussions and peer learning on how to estimate the experiences gained during pandemic years. So this report, first of all, is a very useful, I would say, guide and even maybe handbook to identify the unexpectedly rich wealth of existing instruments, with more even instruments likely to be emerging maybe these days. But at the time we were implementing this analysis, it was a concise desk research and analysis of the instruments available for institutions to respond to their diverse needs, but also to present some common challenges to address their users, their stakeholders, their academy members, and to implement self-assessment in the area of digitally enhanced learning and teaching. So actually we started this activity by agreeing on the methodology, how we are going to analyze the instruments available in the scope. So first of all, we developed a common template to identify the instruments available. We found around 30 instruments available for the analysis, but after observations and also identifying some characteristics that we agreed for our instrument, we concluded with the 20 instruments that were selected and directly focused digitally enhanced teaching and learning development for higher education from a critical self-assessment perspective. So this activity of the desk research actually was started with the review process of each instrument. At least 2 instruments were independently reviewed by 2 institutions. And then the desk research report was produced and then further peer reviewed with observations arising from consortium and also from advisory board. So all in all, we have 23 instruments in the end in our desk research report. And you see some of them listed here in the slide, but of course I invite you to pick up the report and see that the very first part of it has a descriptive character, and then the second part is a very practical one when you can select the instrument on the basis of different characteristics and also accessibility that either model or instrument provides. And well, of course, so what are self-instruments for? So first of all, we identified the key areas, I would say, the key themes that support the higher education institutions for self-analysis, self-assessment. Of course, the majority of the instruments include policy and governance, funding, infrastructure, curriculum and assessment, staff, continuous professional development, student support, quality assurance, and other areas that of course are covered in the majority of them. However, beyond the focus on a specific area, the instruments are very helpful as we identified to initiate technical and structural transformation. So by involving members across entire higher education institution, students, staff, leadership, external stakeholders, and to have a discussion with them on how each of the areas or key themes are affected by transformation and digitalization in the areas of teaching and learning. So not only data collection and evidence collection, but also share ideas, concerns, lessons learned, and facilitated conversations are of course fostered by such activities implemented with the help of self-assessment instrument. And of course, depending on the purpose and the nature of the instrument, they might support strategy development, first reflections on digital enhanced learning and teaching, support internal or external review, develop guidance, identify best practices, and of course, provision of feedback. And I'm sure that today in this webinar, we're going to discuss how we benefit from this. Thank you. Back to you, Michael, if I...
Yes, I think it's actually back to me for the immediately, at least. I think, Michael, now it's time to go to the conversation, to the discussion you would like to hold, right?
Yes, indeed.
Yes, with two representatives from institutions who have used a self-assessment tool. Could I have the next slide, please? Yes, the next one, please. Yes, here. Thank you. So just to briefly introduce our speakers here, we have Aisling McKenna, who's the Director of Quality Promotion and Institutional Research at Dublin City University in Ireland, and Ruta Petrosgaite, who's the Chair of the Digitalization Strategy Subgroup at Vytautas Magnuson University in Lithuania. I would like to remind here that this discussion will also be based on the two videos from the two respective institutions that you have received in your emails before this workshop. I can perhaps put the links once again in the chat box while you will be kicking off discussion with your guests. Michael, I'm handing back the floor to you.
Well, thank you. So thanks, Ruta, and thanks, Aisling, for joining us here. I hope everybody watched the videos, and if not, nevertheless, we will have a discussion here about your experience with self-assessment and with self-assessment tools. Probably to start it, why did you actually do it? I mean, to both of you, I start with Ruta. Why did you do a self-assessment?
Well, there were a few reasons for that, very good reasons, and I'd like to start with an overall favorable context for digitalization in general, and digital learning and study and teaching in particular. Well, the framework of your project also adds a lot to the motivation to step aside, to look from above, to systematize previous experiences. And we did it already at the beginning of 2020 when Irina organized a meeting for everybody interested to discuss how we should proceed. That was at the very beginning of the year, just before pandemia. Well, of course, pandemia did its job for everybody all over the world, and we were very glad to be quite prepared to continue with teaching and learning during those two difficult periods. But what I'd like to say that I find especially important, that is motivated people. They are motivated as never before, and if they have a good guidance, and we have such a guidance at the university, the Institute of Innovations, so that helps a lot. And actually, we were willing to do that self-assessment.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. How was that for you, Aisling? I understood from Ruta it coincided with the Corona event, but it was actually not triggered by it. You wanted to do that before. Was that the same for you, Aisling?
Yes, it was exactly the same. In fact, we had started considering when and how we might conduct a broad self-assessment of digital learning, probably since around 2018, starting to think about the right time to do it, what the parameters or the terms of reference would be, who would be involved in that self-assessment and how we would carry that out. I think in terms of a launching point, in terms of why we had considered such a thematic cross-institutional review of digital learning, I think it had, I suppose, thinking about two factors. Within the Irish context, my own university, DCU, would have had a long and sectorally leading reputation in relation to, first of all, distance education, but then online education, relative to other institutions within the Irish higher education sector. However, that landscape has changed. And there are now many more opportunities across many more institutions for engagement with digital learning. So it would have been my intention that it was time for us to take stock of where we were in relation to digital learning more generally. So that's one historical piece. I think, however, more importantly, was that in our institutional strategies since 2013, there would have been an emphasis, certainly implicit emphasis, if not explicit, on the important role that digital learning was going to play in, as part of the broader student experience. And I think doing a cross-institutional review was an opportunity for us to see if we were walking the talk. So publicly, we were talking a lot about our leadership in digital learning spaces. We talked a lot about our thought leadership in this space. But the review was an opportunity for us to credibly take stock of where we actually were, and then to think about where we wanted to take that also in the future. And finally, I suppose I come at this not from a digital learning perspective. I'm not a professional nor an academic in that space. I'm a quality assurance individual. So I was coming at it from the perspective to experiment almost in, could we take a strategically important theme? Could we look at it on a cross-institutional basis? Because if it works for digital learning, where we have enthusiastic leaders like Professor Mark Brown, can I then apply it to another important strategic theme, be that internationalization, graduate employability, and so on? So part of it was an experiment from a QA perspective, but with a very pertinent and important purpose for us as far as digital learning was concerned.
Indeed, I think you provide a good record on that in your video, where you explain the different way, I mean, how you structured it. It's really a QA project approach, structured, and you also explain who you involved there. So you had actually students and staff, I would say, fully involved at different stages and in different functions.
Yes, so the scope allowed for quite a breadth of data collection and evidence gathering, of which a benchmarking tool, and the one we used was a code, was only a small part of. So, but yes, it was very much led by a cross-institutional steering group. And we had hoped that that was about bringing together different voices from around the institution who possibly didn't have a chance to talk to each other about what their priorities are, what their experiences are. And that over a period of 9 to 12 months of self-assessment, we could start exploring those and kind of come to a shared understanding of where we needed to go in the future.
Thanks. Ruta, was that similar at your institution? As in your presentation, you also make the point about academic community involvement and also in the decision-making on the future steps.
Yes, quite a few groups were formed and they discussed, and they ended up with a SWOT analysis of their specific issue. And that was a very good possibility to meet people that otherwise we could not meet in our daily experiences. I mean, students, international relation officers, the people that are responsible for the programs and share our views. So that was a wealth of experience. And I believe that we could, after a while, repeat the exercise and to see where we are in a year or so.
So similar as Eichling, who said that they might use this approach also for other areas like internationalization, you would repeat that for digitalization and then assess on what he had achieved. Interesting. A question is, how did you involve them then? I mean, how did you identify students, for example, and stuff? Came that from the faculties, or did you have a call?
In putting together a team that was going to lead self-assessment, there were, I suppose, a couple of principles. One was that the balance of membership would favor slightly academic interests or academic perspectives, and a broad range of disciplines from across the institution, from each of the faculties. Those individuals were, I suppose, handpicked in a way because they held positions of academic leadership or coordination of teaching and learning, or in some cases were very much digital learning enthusiasts. Mm-hmm. It also included, then from a professional support perspective, individuals with particular responsibilities for delivering various aspects of our digital learning ecosystem. So the library, our IT department, the teaching enhancement unit who delivers support and professional development for educators in teaching and learning, our student support and development function. And then the last group of individuals were students, and in particular, the students that we involved in the steering group meetings over a period of 6 to 9 months were generally elected student representatives. So they held either class representative functions or were senior members of the students' union. So those were the students who were involved. So we attempted to get a fairly broad church of people together with a slight emphasis on being academically led in this particular instance.
Thanks. Now, regarding the approach that you used at your institutions, Ruta, you mentioned already a SWOT analysis, but you also used the DIGICOM instrument
Yes.
in your analysis. Why did you choose that?
Well, we had a history using that tool. Actually, it was a part of the project with the participation of the researchers from our university. The project was financed by the National Research Council, and it started exactly in 2015 when the tool was prepared, when it was made up and it was chosen, applied. And it's handy to try to use it for some other reason, and that was self-evaluation.
And Aisling, you use the, Therese just wrote it into the chat actually. If you have questions, there will be an opportunity for questions afterwards, but you could put them in the chat box. And Aisling, you use the ACODE instrument, among others, I would say, because you very much emphasize a pick and mix approach as well.
We did. So there were, we conducted surveys among all of our staff and students to gather opinion there. We conducted a range of focus groups with both staff and students, and created, I suppose, individual focus groups which reflected potentially different perspectives. For instance, digital enthusiasts and those who are maybe not just so enthusiastic in a separate group. But in terms of specifically the benchmarking tool, we did use the ACODE tool. We used that, and I'll be very honest, we used it because Mark Brown told us to use it. So but I think at a time when we were collecting data from a range of sources, it was like deciding on what you want to have for breakfast. I just wanted somebody else to make that decision for us. So the short answer is that we took advice, and Mark Brown had suggested it. I think the rationale for why Mark had selected that particular tool was because of its maturity, its comprehensiveness, and the extent to which the themes within that particular tool answered some of the research questions that we'd already established for ourselves as part of the review. So it was that it happened to fit our context, our need, the questions that we wanted to answer. And it was, as you say, part of a pick and mix approach where we were doing different forms of research as well. So.
Well, then to both of you, and I start with Aisling then, did it deliver? I mean, did it help you actually to do that kind of review?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is, I wish that it could have done more. And the reason for that long answer is a lot about more about how we implemented it and how, rather than the virtues of the tool itself. So we conducted the benchmarking very much towards the end of the self-assessment period, at a time when we really needed to come to our conclusions pretty quickly, because there was a self-assessment report that needed to go to our external peer review panel. It was conducted at a time of great organizational flux in relation to preparing the first full year of online education delivery in terms of managing the COVID crisis. And what we found as we started the discussions around each of the pillars or themes within a code was that each of them deserved quite a significant period of time of interrogation and discussion. And we did not allow ourselves that time. So for instance, we thought that we'd hold in a code workshop. We set aside 3 hours to discuss it. In the end, we had 4 3-hour workshops to get through the entire tool. That may seem like a long time. It was time really well spent. But I think if we were using it again, we would use it in a much more stratified manner, in a much more organized manner, because the discussions that were starting to happen within those rooms, even though they were virtual, were really important discussions, and they deserved more time than we were unfortunately able to give them in that context. So,
how was that for you, Ruta?
For us, as I see it, it was just the first and very important step. And it's not the end of it, because, well, as a leader of the strategic direction and organizational culture group, I saw a very good opportunity to go wider, to go broader, and to include digital learning and teaching into the context of open science, research infrastructures, open data, let's say European open science cloud, open learning resources. Actually, a lot of similar and partially overlapping activities are going on. And I see at the organizational level that if we could put them all together, we would benefit much more than we did up to now. Actually, the most important moment was that at the moment when we had this self-evaluation group, the new strategy of the university was being discussed, and we managed to feed in some guidelines, some definitions of strategic measures and the ways to carry them out. So actually that was the best use of our discussions. However, that's not the end to it, as I already said. And what I see now as a possibility is to make a map, institutional map, let's say, of all the digital resources that we have. Try to merge, not so much to merge them, but to put them in an overall network for our students to be able to use, let's say, open research data together with open learning data. And the most important issue why we should look at it from a more systemic way and take that systemic approach is that in this case, we will be able to have a better suited specific legal acts, again, at the university level. Because now we have only a strategy, it's very broad, and the concepts that are used in the strategy, they are not the ones that we use in our talk on everyday level. And it would be very important to talk the same language, just because if we don't use the same terminology, we are on different levels. And I am afraid that we may simply miss each other's point.
So probably we go through the questions from the chat. First question is to Aisling, but I could also extend that to Ruta. So how many people do you think you actually involved in it?
As evaluators who were helping lead the evaluation and coming to the conclusions, there were probably about 23 or 24 members in that group. In terms of those that we engaged in providing feedback to the process, we're talking about thousands of students, and including from surveys, probably hundreds of staff. In terms of in focus groups, 50, 60 individuals. So I would delineate between those who were involved in leading the evaluation, and that was about 20, 23 or 24 people.
Mm-hmm. And Ruta?
Less than 30, again, 23,
yeah.
25, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then also to both of you, how did you disseminate the results of the self-report questionnaires to the main stakeholders? Who did you share the findings with at the institution? Was that for everybody, or?
I can answer that from our perspective.
Yeah, please.
So this is where we would reflect, I suppose, on what we did and how a quality assurance hat on the process maybe didn't help us in terms of the sharing of it. So the self-assessment report was shared broadly within with everyone who's going to be involved with meeting a peer review panel, everyone who was an evaluator, with the university senior management team, and with anybody else who asked for it. And that is because generally within our quality assurance processes, the generation of a self-assessment report is something that's kept relatively confidential between an area that are undergoing review and the peer reviewers who they're talking to. The purpose of that is primarily to facilitate a process that allows for a really deep interrogation and self-critical analysis, because you can say things in the confidence that it's not going to end up in a published document. Mm-hmm. So that was the approach we took for the self-assessment report. However, the findings of our peer review group in response to the broader quality review agenda are public, and those are published on our website. As Rudd is responding, I'll pop that URL into the chat box. So self-assessment, relatively confidential, the findings of the peer review group, not a public document, but something I think that we would reflect on again if we were doing this type of thematic review.
Okay, thanks. And Ruta?
Well, we did not have anything like one piece at the end, I mean a report, but the outcomes of each thematic group, and all the materials are available for people to have a look at it, and the outcomes, the findings were presented during the meetings of the Rector's Office and the Senate. And again, I believe that this is not the end of it. They will be incorporated in later activities, broad activities of the digitalization of our university.
An interesting question. What was the reaction of teachers and probably also from students to this self-evaluation?
I think that staff were very honest with us in their engagement. There was certainly not a sense from them in the experiences that they would have talked about that were, I suppose, that were airbrushed for public consumption. So I think people were very honest and engaged with us. I think that from a student representative perspective, certainly those involved within the steering group, I would have been conscious that they were in a way representing themselves, and as student representatives attempting to represent other students, I think it would have been nice to have further student voices around the table to ensure that we could capture a range of perspectives. But I think that largely people were relatively engaged where they were invited to be active participants in the review.
Well, I'd like to raise two issues. The first one that was discussed by our teachers, that some kind of wrong approach to digital courses, because the public opinion is that it's an easy job. Once you make them, then you are free. And that should not be paid extra or paid adequately. But when you come to think of it, actually, what is lacking in the digital teaching curricula? Interactivity. And every time you meet new students, you have to remake the course. Let alone all the tasks that have to made brand new for every generation of students. They cannot be left as they are. So it's a lot of work to do, and it's misleading to think that digital courses, from the point of view of teacher, it's an easy job. While from the point of view of students, what issues they raised? They raised a very important issue of open learning resources. That they should be more systematic, more compatible, more, so to say, described on a meta level, so that students would know before they start using what are the aims, where they are, how they relate to each other. So we had some very good proposals that we will take into consideration.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I have another question for you, Ruta, and that concerns the idea of the institutional map or institutional mapping. And if you could elaborate a little bit more how that has been done or is being done.
Well, that's a pretty fresh idea. Our university is well advanced in Lithuania from the point of view of digital resources and services. We participate in quite a few European research infrastructures that include accumulation of digital resources and helping students and researchers to use them. But that's more on the research level. Then, of course, we have teaching and learning materials and resources that also form a big part, I would say, maybe as big as research infrastructures. And also now we see that we should add the third part, administrative resources, because they are also very important. So now we have to discuss how to merge all three parts and how to make some kind of a, I don't know, map with the descriptions. And I believe we need a special group for that. We discussed that we should have a coordinating group all over the university, trying not to impose on our people with additional work, but just start with status quo, just register what we have. Then we see what formats are used, what could be done in a better way with minimum effort. And what is feasible and what is not. And let's say we don't have to support and to archive or somehow to use all the resources that we have. So that's a permanent job to decide what to take away, what to archive or simply delete. But for that, again, we need some kind of strategic decisions, and not only on one faculty, or let's say just teaching, learning, or research. So it's a lot of work to do, but I believe that that could help us a lot.
Thank you. I see Aisling nodding to it. So sounds a bit similar, probably differently phrased, but a similar approach that as you have been doing.
Zoomitis, yeah. One of the major outcomes of our review from a peer review perspective, and one that we had identified ourselves, was this notion of an overarching framework for progress and enhancement of digital learning. And it sounds very similar to that idea of an institutional map. That broad concept or goal or idea of connecting the dots across your digital learning ecosystem is obviously clearly attractive, to avoid working in silos, to have, I think, that would contribute to shared understandings of what we mean by digital learning and where we want to take digital learning as into the future. It is a worthy goal. Mm-hmm. It is also incredibly organizationally complex. But that idea, at least as a starting point, that there is value in people talking to each other and considering problems together, because this is a whole of institution issue as well. So, yeah.
So I hope with this we also answered Benjamin's question about whether you actually advanced towards the goal of an digital education ecosystems at your institution. So I think that was a very good presentation and a very good conversation on what's going on at your institution. I'm also very grateful for that you put some further evidence to the findings that we had out of our exercise. Irina had presented that we did this inventory of around 30 tools that or instruments that we found, where we thought this is actually quite useful, but are they actually used? And we found they are not very often used. And I think you gave us an idea how they can be used and how they probably also have to be used in a very different fashion depending on the challenges and the goals that you have, and in a close communication and cooperation with your communities. So thanks for that. And I'm handing back to Therese then.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you also to Aisling and to Ruta for your contributions. So I think now it is time to launch some discussion into breakout sessions in smaller groups. So before letting you go into the breakout sessions, I just would like to show you this. This might be familiar to you because all of you participants to this workshop actually received some survey questions before this workshop, and these are the results. So it serves a bit like a background also before we go into a breakout session to delve into the topic of self-evaluation and self-assessment tools deeper. It's to see a little bit basically what's the situation regarding strategies for digitally enhanced learning and teaching. What we can see is that most of you do have this as part of an overall institutional strategy, as a dedicated strategy, or at faculty level as well. And what we can see also is that only one person answered no, but also a few others said that this is still currently under development. This strategy has led to action plans or roadmaps to some extent, or quite a few, so this is not too bad. When it comes to reviews, I guess you will be interested to also further discuss this in your breakout groups. It's mostly, yes, occasionally, yes, it's evaluated annually or every 2 or 3 years, but still quite a few of you answered no, our institutional strategy for digitalization is actually not reviewed. And the last question was about the self-evaluation tool. And here we can see that a little bit less than half of you who answered said that no, because we don't really know about them. Well, I hope you do know a bit more about them now, but also a few of you answered that you have been considering it. And a few also answered no for other reasons. Thank you. So I think now we can split into breakout groups indeed. And these groups will run until 3:40, and then we will have a little break. And the groups will be chaired by Sharon Flynn from the Irish Universities Association. Sharon, can you put your virtual hand up so that we can see you on the screen perhaps? And the second chair will be Zoe Gabrielou from University of Thrace. Yeah, so Zoe is here. And the third chair will be Ruben Janssens from ESU. If you could also, yes. So these are our 3 facilitators, and you will go immediately into a breakout group to discuss some questions we have prepared for you with one of these facilitators. So I'll just say, see you, yeah, in 40 minutes. more or less 40 minutes back and have a nice discussion.
My juice will keep going. Folks, I'm just operating off a different campus today and I don't have my power lead with me, so I'm hopeful that I'm not going to cut out. We had a really interesting discussion and we have some good notes that hopefully can be shared later. It's a cliche to say it, but it is the truth that there were many more questions than answers. And so in the brief few minutes that I've got, I just wanted to sort of coordinate or collate our feedback into 5 questions. So the first question that we really had quite an interesting discussion around was, as the broad heading, do we all share the same conception of digital learning? What do we all wish to achieve from digital learning? And it's quite clear that we don't all have the same conception, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because it really links to the drivers and the context. Within our group, we had someone from the Open University of Cyprus, where fully online distance delivery is a core part of its mission. And that's going to determine the sort of decisions in a different direction, if you like. The question also arose under that heading is it possible to really have teaching and learning without a digital dimension? So what does the digital really mean again? And then a similar related question under that broad umbrella was, where does digital learning, whatever you might call it, fit within your teaching and learning strategy? Is it something that's separate or is it embedded in the strategy? So we had a reasonably good discussion around the challenges of language, what we call it. And then under those discussions, we also got down into some of the challenges we face around things like contact hours, traditional views of contact hours and the way that they're determined under our existing structures and language. Questions were raised about really learning design at the end of it, regardless of whether we're talking about blended, hybrid, technology enhanced, raising questions about more explicit designs for learning. And there was a very valuable contribution about the importance of assessment. And that's something that COVID seems to have taught us as well. So summarizing that first question that I posed, again, repeating myself, but the drivers that you have for the way you want to digitize the teaching and learning experience are really crucial to how you might go about approaching self-assessment. The second question is, how do you do self-assessment in your institution? And to some degree, we heard case studies, but I think there was a really valuable observation from one of the group members that it's not necessarily easy to do because in some institutions, there's no place for this kind of self-assessment. What I mean by that is not necessarily a unit that's dedicated for it, or in the context of digital learning, it may just be infused across the institution. And so finding the place. Linked to that is also finding the space and the capacity and the human resource hours to do it. I think we all heard that this is not something you do quickly. So these are challenges that maybe make self-assessment not a simple thing. Especially in some countries, it seems there are no external requirements for this sort of self-assessment in the field of digital learning. Third question, how do we truly engage students? There, I think, was a recognition that just small samples of students don't fully represent the student body. The Open University of Cyprus talked about an anonymous survey that they use. In the DCU case, if Aisling didn't mention it, we did employ a company actually, partly for capacity reasons, but also for independence to do student focus group interviews. But just the question of what student engagement really looks like and student participation. Fourthly, were the actions of the self-assessments that we heard about, and anyone that else has done self-assessment, and for the record, it doesn't sound like many people have done this in the field of digital learning, how do you really share the findings and what evidence is there that the lessons and actions truly get implemented? And I think I shared with the group that at DCU, this is taking a lot longer to implement the actions than we ever anticipated. And it will take another year to implement one of the actions. That's just how significant, I guess, in one sense, the recommendations are. But when you talk about a complex ecology. Last question that we posed was what can we learn from those who have completed self-assessment. Don't really have anything else to add here other than this is an example of that learning. But I suppose I would say the report from the DIGIHE project did say that no institution is an island. And so the more that you reach out as well as looking in, I think is an important part of self-assessment. So building those networks, that is in itself a form of benchmarking. So I'll stop on that note. Hopefully that's in the sort of time frame and there's something that's valuable there to feed into the next group and the discussion to come.
Thank you very much, Mark. So with no further ado, I'll pass the floor to the next breakout session rapporteur. So perhaps to Alistair. Are you there, Alistair?
Yup, I'm here. Thank you.
Right.
I thought I was third, but I'm second. So I was a little bit surprised there. No
Sorry,
problem.
do you want to be third?
No.
All right.
Okay,
let's go for you as second then.
I had to just sort of coordinate. Okay. Yeah, we had with the two questions about how institutional self-evaluation and so on can help develop a high-performance digital education ecosystem was one, and do you think self-evaluation tools could be helpful? As you can imagine, we embroidered on these questions. We tended to they sort of go into each other, and we looked at many areas. I'll just go through a few points. One point is this. I think there is a bit of a problem with the terminology. How high is high performance? What exactly do we mean by digital education? Why is it digital? Is the terminology fit for purpose, or will people be more confused by reading it? There was a little bit of that. And I think Michael referred to that at the beginning. I think one thing that was reported from several places is right now we have teachers, staff are still in the middle of this process. It is still confusing. It is still sort of ongoing, and there isn't the time to step back and reflect. There's very little time available for that. It's still a matter of, at the moment, trying to do hybrid teaching, and you know, teachers are, it's still a sense of emergency, a sense of an unusual circumstances. And it's hard to analyze that process when you're standing in the middle of it. And many were talking about the lack of time, the lack of space to step back. And that's a problem. When will we get that space? We don't know. Many people are thinking, you know, did we handle the digital transition very well because we got some reasonably good feedback? Or was it just a matter of survival, good enough, and we got away with it? And one very important factor is how moving beyond emergency online teaching, because a lot of the teachers and the students are not really aware of what good, communicative, collaborative online learning is like, because they've never experienced it. And it's difficult to want something that you don't know exists. So there's this problem that many people see the digital side in certain terms through what they have experienced. So if I have been subjected to the emergency teaching with lots of recorded lectures and do it yourself, that's my perception of digital. Whether I'm a teacher who hasn't had time to think beyond that and doesn't know that you can, or the student in the same situation. And their evaluation of that will be colored by that limited view. How do we widen the view? We talked about helping that by raising the bar, by letting teachers look at each other's courses, to peer review, observing each other's practice, mentorship, and even courses. There was one German course called Smile, which I like the sound of, which was trying to give good examples of practice. And also universities disseminating that practice through guides and resources and so on internally. One was using MOOCs that are available to encourage staff to use MOOCs for professional development. Also important that the administrative staff are included in this skills development program. because there is a risk of too much focus on the teachers and the administrators are left behind. They also need these digital skills. They need to understand what the teachers and the students are doing with digital technology. And I suppose a very important conclusion there was it's not about courses and resources really for helping the teachers. It's about changing culture and attitudes. We can provide lots of courses, we can have FAQ pages, we can have guides, but a lot of it is up here. And that's where the biggest barriers come. Tradition, culture, attitudes, those take a long time to change. And that's not something that we learn even in a couple of years. So there's a lot of challenges there. Also, in terms of the self-evaluation, I think all institutions are reviewing and self-assessing, but they're not using specific tools for it. They're doing it as part of their just what's happened, why did it happen, where are we going? So I think a lot are maybe most are unaware of the tools available, and many feel they want to handle that process themselves. So it's a valuable process, even if you don't have a tool to frame it. But acknowledging the value of teaching and pedagogy, rather than focus on digital tools, platforms, and method of delivery, I think Mark was into that as well, that it is about teaching, it's about pedagogy, whether you use digital or analog or whatever you want to call it. It's how do we change teaching and learning from the instructional content transfer of the past to collaborative, active learning where everybody is a participatory. That's the paradigm shift. Digital elements are important there, but not always. And it's using the traditional and the digital in a good blend. And finally, there were some points about maybe we need to view our practice from the outside. So external reviewers and mentors are very valuable. We need more qualitative data on all this process for research. And also, how does this enhancement of digital education benefit our students in their careers? Can we see how this actually leads to concrete developments for the students?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alistair. So I'll pass the floor to Michael. Where are you, Michael? Oh, I see you there. For the last report, and I guess you will have some common points with the other rapporteurs, and then after that, we'll go into the last session.
I think we have a lot of common points. One is probably that we didn't really manage to answer the questions. So it's also interesting to see how different the groups have tackled them. So I think a strong point in our group was really the concern that we lose the momentum and that it really goes back to the old orthodoxy. Some colleagues said it, we are going back to what we had in 2019. And while this is partly understandable, I mean, given the situation, emergency, remote teaching, we heard that, the challenges that colleagues faced, and now even more with the challenge of hybrid teaching. So all this puts a lot of pressure on people. But it's the concern is really that we have seen some highly successful approaches which are suddenly losing their appeal. The advantages, the benefits that have been found in some of the solutions, different approaches are somehow lost and get ignored now. And what is even more concerning, even at institutions where digital was probably not high on the agenda, but those institutions, they appreciated that suddenly there was centrality given to learning and teaching. And this, again, seems to vanish a little bit, also probably because it's no longer a collegial or collective issue at the institution. So that's, I think, a main concern. We then tackled the question on whether assessment could help. And there were, of course, kind of an agreement that it could be useful also to raise awareness and also to face some of the realities. So, and it was mentioned that many colleagues were not really aware of their training needs and also about all the things that are done at an institution which are in place or which work and which may not work. And even for institutions which had a lot of experience in online learning and in digital solutions, they found that there's a lot of complacency. So it's not just about digital, as Alistair and Mark had also said. Assessment would be good, but on the other hand, it was also mentioned that there is usually a concern among staff members when assessment comes up. For internal assessment, it's often better than for external, but nevertheless, you have to be aware that there might be resistance, and also that there's a risk of only embarrass people, but not really to change things. Mm. So it's an important point to really think of how you can involve people and who you also involve, as you do not just want to preach to the converted, and to avoid probably top-down approaches and then try to convince people. The key point here is actually what is good teaching, and we simply didn't find a recipe of how to demonstrate it. The point was made that you could, of course, have guidelines and you can produce evidence, but actually, research tells you since decades how teaching can be done better, but it hasn't really impacted learning and teaching practices, at least not at a large scale. So the question is then, so basically you have to continue to push for it within the institution through a coalition of the willing, and then try to convince others over. And one point that has been made is that it's really about what we see in some systems and in some institutions, that rewarding teaching, the growing professionalization, that this is really helpful. And another point that has also been mentioned, peer learning among individuals, but also exchanges among institutions. So I guess if anybody came to this workshop with the hope to find the sweeping big solutions, quick solutions, we don't have them. It looks very much like what you would call in sports, marginal gains. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm also pushing now because we are a bit ahead of the program. Thank you very much. Well, this gives so much food for thought, but I guess now we can have also the panel discussion, and we will take forward several, if not many, of those points forward as well. Thank you very much to the three rapporteurs. I just would like to quickly introduce the final panel of this workshop before handing the floor to the moderator of this panel. So the moderator of this panel is Alistair Creelman. Do I even need to introduce you anymore? You're the e-learning specialist, higher education development at Linnaeus University in Sweden. And for our panel discussing what action needs to be taken on a classroom, on an institutional and national or European level to develop a high performance digital ecosystem, we have three panelists. We have Ruben Janssens from the Executive Committee of the European Student Union, ESU. We have Sharon Flynn. Hi, Sharon, who's a project manager for enhancing digital capacity in Irish universities from the Irish Universities Association. And we have Ivana Juraga. Hi, Ivana, nice to see you. Policy Officer at the European Commission for the DIGIHE Digital Education Unit. So, Alistair, should I handle the floor back to you?
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, nice to get the chance to field some questions to you. As you've read, we're going to talk about so what action is needed to develop this high performance digital education ecosystem, however we want to define it. And it's about three levels. And you can say the national level, or even the international level, the institutional level, and the sort of shop floor, classroom, everyday level. You could say the macro, the meso, and the micro. I thought I could give you the would you like to start from the top or start from the bottom? What's easiest? We go from the top? Okay, nationally, internationally, what can be done? How do we do that? If we take really, well, Ivana, you're really at that level. What measures can be taken? How do we develop this ecosystem? And how do you see that from the European Commission's point of view?
Thanks a lot, and hello, everyone. I have to say this starting from the top analogy is a bit ironic, because I was just reflecting on how much I was enjoying these last 2 hours sitting among the institutions and actually listening from what is coming from that level. And I have to say I also had some pleasure because a lot of the things that we found in the preparation of the Digital Education Action Plan and the things that we claimed in our supporting documents seem to be confirmed, but what I was hearing today, both from the EUA research and from what the various institutions were saying. So it reassured me that we are on the right track. Maybe just reflecting a little bit on the question of the high-performing digital education ecosystem. And I wanted to take just one little step back and also reflect on how we define high-performing. And for the European Commission, we see there are 2 elements. One is effectiveness, and another is inclusion as an overarching goal. So we think that, you know, if we are developing a digital education ecosystem, but we are not including all learners, or, you know, we are broadening the divide or creating yet another divide, this time on the digital level, then we are failing in our actions. So for us, really making sure we have an impact, and that we have an impact on all learners is really one of the crucial elements. So in the Digital Education Action Plan, as Michael mentioned at the beginning of the workshop, we defined a set of key enabling factors, as we call them, which is quite a fancy word, basically to say building blocks of a digital education ecosystem. And they include things like infrastructure, like assistive technologies for learners with disabilities, upskilling of teachers, and the meaningful integration of digital technologies into pedagogy, because there again, the message that we always have to keep repeating, and the message that I heard many times today, is that we don't want to use digital technologies for their own sake. What we want is to use them to improve the teaching and learning process, to enhance it where they can help, but not just to have them so we can show off our fancy tools and our fancy apps and so on. But all these building blocks, I think, they risk to remain isolated and unexploited if we don't have a systematic organizational change within the institutions themselves. And we risk to have what we had before the pandemic, which is a lot of very nice, very interesting and innovative initiatives that were disjointed and often short-lived. So very nice kind of pilot programs that didn't really go far and have a more systemic impact. When we were preparing the Digital Education Action Plan, we conducted an online consultation with our stakeholders. And one of the main challenges that was highlighted there was precisely a lack of planning and a lack of vision for integrating digital technologies into education and training. Of course, there were issues with the skills of teachers and platforms and so on, but really this lack of planning and vision is something that kept coming back. And I saw also in Therese's slides, one finding that we had seen as well, which was that a lot of education and training institutions have digital strategies, digital action plans, but then a lot of them don't monitor how they are implemented and don't review them periodically. And this is something that we are really missing. And I think we have a bit of a similar issue at the policy level, where we have a lot of initiatives, but they don't always come together and get integrated. If we look now at one of the major EU instruments post-pandemic is the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which has offered huge financial opportunities to the member states. And a lot of them have chosen to invest in digital education, but not very many have chosen to conduct comprehensive reforms of their education and training systems to actually integrate digital technologies meaningfully. And this is something that we want to work on, because we can spend a lot of money, we can buy a lot of equipment, and then still not have the impact that we want. So just to conclude, we are working towards this at the EU level, and very recently, on the 8th of October, we launched at the high level in the Commission a structured dialogue on digital education and skills with the member states, where we will be inviting the governments and engaging in a dialogue with all the different stakeholders to really reflect on the key enabling factors for digital education and to use this momentum that we have now. We heard in a couple of breakout reports that there is a fear that we will lose the momentum and this window of opportunity we have to integrate digital into our education and training. So we are trying to keep that up also at the very highest political level. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, so we've got a lot of very implementable strategies. We've got brave words, we've got documents, we've got frameworks, we've got criteria. You know, there's a lot up there, but there's this gap. It's not filtering down so well. It's still very, very patchy implementation and very many different comprehensions of what the policy is about. Sharon, if I could maybe say that you're sort of, at a national level, you've got all those good initiatives from the European Commission at the top. You've got to sort of try to implement it nationally. How do you get some kind of a national framework to this and make sure that the institutions are working in a similar way? And sort of how do you pass that on and how do you implement it?
Yeah, when you put it like that, Alistair, it sounds like a really huge task. I think one of the first things just to say, and this came up in our breakout group as well, was that when we're looking to the future, we need to be careful that we don't just base it on the experience of the pandemic, but we need to look further back as well. I think we're lucky in Ireland that we had a national survey that took place, and I know Catherine Cronin is in the meeting somewhere, but we ran a national index survey. It's the National Digital Experience Survey with staff and students across all higher education institutions in Ireland, and that happened in November 2019, which was right before the pandemic. So when we hear that you know, people want to go back to the old ways because they were better in some way, actually we have the evidence to say no, they weren't actually. So that's been very useful. So yeah, how to translate from sort of European and national initiatives down into university level. You know, I think part of it is coming back to having those conversations and facilitating those conversations. We've heard a lot today about how important context is. And we know that having a strategy obviously is a very good thing to have, but there can often be a huge gap between strategy and reality and what's happening on the ground. And it occurred to me, I kind of wrote it down again today when I was listening to Ruta and Aisling talking. You know, there's a saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and culture is really what we are trying to change here. And that's really, really hard, and nobody likes change. One thing I've learned, so just to explain, I work across 7 universities represented by the Irish Universities Association. And I have been in post for about 2.5 years, so before the pandemic hit. And very early on, I'd say within the first month, I realized how different each university is in terms of culture. They each have their own strategies and their own different goals, but there's a huge difference in culture, and that's just within a small country like Ireland. So it is very difficult, but I think first of all, you have to acknowledge, you have to respect the culture and the strategy and the goals of each individual institution, and then look at how you can provide a framework to try and bring them along. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to do. But the other thing that I have really noticed over the last 2.5 years, and I would say particularly during the pandemic, was the value of just providing a forum for sharing experiences and talking, and you know, what are the issues coming up, what are the challenges that universities are facing, And that has been hugely valuable in helping each university to move along, to deal with the pandemic. And I think it will be useful if we can provide time and space for institutions to reflect on what has been happening over the last 18, 20 months, and to consolidate that. Because one thing that we have noticed is there was a huge coming together on, I suppose, prioritization of teaching over the last 18 months and recognizing that common purpose. There is a danger that we will lose that, and that came up in our discussion group today. But if we can try and force that conversation, force that reflection to take place, I think that we can really make some good headway. So that's one of my one of the things that I had noted down and that I really wanted to say is that huge value that there is in sharing and talking and discussing. And having groups coming together to solve problems. And it's not just at the highest level, it's not just at, vice chancellors and heads of teaching and learning, but there's also value in other groups coming together, such as, librarians, buildings officers, exams administration. Exams administration is a really interesting one because very often the exams will determine what happens within an institution, the timing of things, assessment of things. And we know that assessment can be the driving force behind, I'm not going to say learning, but how things work in a university. So if we can get those people to come together and to discuss and to see what's going on, I think that could have a huge amount of benefit. The other thing that I would really like to highlight, and I'm hoping I'm not going to step on Ruben's toes, but the involvement of students in decision making over the last 18 months has been phenomenal. And for me, one of the biggest successes of my work has been not just student representation, because I think we've gone beyond that. It's not just having, the student rep sitting in on a panel, but rather involving students from the beginning to talk about their experiences, their lived experience. Because after all, this is what we're about. It's about our students. And if we don't involve them as consultants, as partners in telling us what's happening, what's working, what's not working, we're missing out on a fantastic resource. So I would really love to see the continuation of students as partners in decision making at the highest level and at all levels. I think that we really, really, really need to listen and to involve our students, not just in making decisions, but also in arriving at solutions and plans. So yeah, I might stop there, and I'm sure we'll come back around to some of those points.
Thanks. I think that's important. I mean, we've got, as Ivana said, we've got lots of grassroots things. We've got a lot of good work has been going on over the years. There's a lot of good work at the top, and somehow we need that sort of meeting place where bottom up meets top down, and arenas for discussion and interaction. Ruben, of course, it's time for you really. And how does ESU come into this, and also your interaction to the national level and the institutional level between the sort of European Students' Union, the national unions, and the people at the institutions? How is that contributing to this process?
Yeah, thank you. Like you said, I think for us, we've got an interesting perspective because, yeah, I'm with my colleagues working on the European level, talking with a lot of people who are doing these exchanges on the European level. But at the same time, we have this direct conversation with our national student representatives who have it as well with those in the institution, but who are all students themselves as well in most cases. So in that sense, we see how those different levels, what they're all doing, and what common goals they have, and how sometimes the conversation gets lost at some level. But Sharon, what you said did absolutely not step on my toes in terms of trying to get this student representation everywhere, not just having student representatives sitting in on panels, but really having students involved in the design process of digital learning and really any learning and teaching from the beginning to the end, if there's ever really an end. That's always been our goal as well. So I think that's amazing that this at least has been able to come up during the pandemic, and I really hope that it stays as well. In terms of what the European level can really contribute to digital learning and teaching, I think what Ivana and Sharon said are two really important things. On one side, investment, and on the other side, exchange as well. Because digitalization has a lot of opportunities, but it's also got a lot of risks if it's not implemented correctly. And in terms, if we want digitalization to have a benefit, and we really believe that it can have a benefit, it can make learning more student-centered, it can make learning more accessible, more international, more flexible, more well-rounded in all. But for that, you need investment. And I think something I've heard come up in the breakout rooms as well is that teachers do not have enough time or space to reflect and to learn about how really to implement good digital learning and teaching, and how to implement good learning and teaching in general. That's something I hear come up a lot as well. And for that, especially in digital education, we need investment as well, but we also need exchange with peers from within the institution and from different institutions and countries. So I'm really happy that you brought up those two things. Now, there's a third thing I want to bring up, and for that, I want to look to quality assurance, because what's one of the main contributions to the European discourse and cooperation in higher education is quality assurance, and those agreements that we have on that level on how to do this and what kind of criteria and requirements. And I think we need to look to that and bring that to digital education as well, because in a lot of the QA procedures, and I don't want to be talking about the technical sides, but really more on what do we want to learn from this, is how do we maintain and enhance the quality of the learning, because that's really what we want to achieve with digital learning as well. We want to enhance the quality, and we want to enhance the accessibility of our learning. So we need to make sure that in all of those assessment procedures that we have within the institution, within the country, and within Europe, that we really look at digital education as well. And for that, we need to make sure that those processes that we have, they have the space, and they have the correct modifications, that they actually look at digital education as well, and that anybody who is involved in the entire quality assurance and enhancement process is really trained for digital education as well. We need to train the teachers, but we also need to make sure that everybody is informed and involved in digital education. And for that, I think what Sharon said about how students are involved is really the core of how we need to do this. We want to change the culture of how we talk about learning and teaching, and we want to change the culture of everybody involved in the institution. And for that, those same principles that we've really been trying to make happen in learning and teaching need to happen in digital education as well. So we're talking about student-centered learning, really. We're talking about ongoing monitoring of how our education and our learning and teaching is happening, about those closed feedback loops, and about the participation of students and any other stakeholders throughout the process. So it's no more than just getting feedback from students at the end from what's happening, but it's really about having the participation of students and of different types of students as well throughout the entire process. So really, there's a lot of challenges in this, but what I hear is that we've got a lot more common than we've got separate. And I think on the European level, we've got a lot of opportunities to really exchange that and to make some agreements as well. One of the best questions I heard to wrap up is, what do we really mean by a high-performing ecosystem, and what criteria do we want? And that's something important if we want to use self-assessment tools as well. And I think for that, the European platform is really ideal to exchange and to really make some agreements on this regard.
There were some of the things you pointed out there, I think almost sort of point back towards maybe Ivana and maybe Sharon. I don't know if you want to comment on any of these points that Ruben came up with, because they're sort of pointing back at about student involvement and so on.
Certainly on the student involvement, I absolutely agree with Ruben, and I think, you know, just looking for student feedback or asking students to approve policies after they have been created, it's too late, it's not enough. We need to have students involved everywhere throughout, you know, all of our institutional business, whether it's at the top table or locally within program design or whatever else. Yeah. But I agree completely with what Ruben has said.
Yeah, Ivana?
Yeah, maybe if I could add, I think another element that we are also trying to promote is beyond just involvement of students, also involvement of the social partners, the civil society, and the private sector as well, which is of course not a new topic in higher education at all, or in education and training in general. But I think again, when we talk about digital education, it gains prominence again. It's something we've been talking about for ages on how to work better with the economic actors, social partners and civil society. And I think we need to have that discussion again as well in the context of digital.
Suddenly things come into my head through this discussion, and a little bit unexpected. One thing I suddenly thought about is when we talk about students, we have the idea that there is a certain, a student looks like this or is a certain type. And we see now that one of the biggest growth areas in higher education is professional development, reskilling of people as old as me. And the students' demographics they're changing rapidly, and that is also a challenge, also for student unions. And what is a student nowadays? How do you define that student? Many students at our universities will never come to our beautiful campuses because they're busy working, but they're attending one of our master's courses or some kind of short program. They're interacting with us, we're helping them, but sadly they don't come to visit us. They're not as visible, and they're not as committed as students. They don't see themselves primarily as students. They see themselves primarily as professional people, family people, part of their community. How do we broaden that? I mean, that's also an element of this problem, because that's very digital. These people are interacting online. How do Ruben, I was thinking about how the students' unions address this new target group. Sorry for surprising you on this one, but I'm interested to hear how it fits in.
Yeah, no worries. I think it's a really interesting question that you say, because as students and as student unions especially, we've been advocating for more accessibility and for more inclusion, especially of different types of learners, because we're not just talking about traditional students anymore. We're really talking about a wide array of different types of learners. And now this reality is coming more and more. And it's good that you mentioned it, because that's really one of the main opportunities that digitalization brings us as well, is really to bring education to those different types of learners. And we're talking about adult education, lifelong learning, really people who come back to higher education. But we're also talking about people from different backgrounds, maybe part-time students. There's a wide array of different types of learners that we are now bringing to higher education more and more. It's a challenge for us as well in terms of how to include them and how to represent their perspectives. It's something that we need to keep in mind all of the time and to be aware of. But really, we hope that digitalization kind of helps in this regard as well, because we can use those digital tools to offer and to really cater to everybody's needs. And that's really the core of student-centered learning as well. We need to analyze what are the needs of all the different types of students that we have, the different types of learners. And then we need to make sure how we can actually bring education to all of them. And the digital tools that we have are important for all of them, but crucial is that we hear from all those different types of students throughout the process of creating and designing these courses, but also when evaluating it.
I think we're going to have to wrap up fairly soon, but there's a question from Irina in the chat. How do you see openness in formats and modes further strengthening higher education in Europe? Are we doing enough to open higher education for collaboration and exchange? Is that an opportunity for us? How do we work with that? Anyone like to pick it up?
I'll have a first go. Oh. Yep, no, Ivana, go ahead.
Go ahead, Ivana.
Okay, thanks a lot. as I'm sure most of you know, the Commission is currently preparing its new European strategy for universities. So this is something that we have also been thinking about a lot, especially also in the context of the European University Alliances, but also beyond that. And I think one message that comes back again, and maybe I'm sounding a little bit like a parrot, but it's that digitalization is not a panacea. And just by having digital tools and collaborating with each other online, it doesn't mean we're going to be more open. One thing that we are seeing now when we talk to universities is, for example, the question of interoperability, because we have all been working on our various IT tools and solutions and platforms in our little bubbles. And now we also have to make them talk to each other. So in that sense, the digital tools themselves can even be an obstacle to more openness. So again, we have to think very intentionally on how we use them. Just by saying, okay, we go digital doesn't mean that we are automatically becoming more open to each other.
Sharon?
I think that was a great answer from Ivana. I think openness is definitely a challenge, because we have to think about who we are open to, and that in itself can be a difficult thing to navigate. And I'm just thinking in terms of maybe teaching staff. There are people who are in a better position to be open than others, and some people can feel quite I suppose violated in a sense. It's a difficult thing to navigate, I think, but certainly we should be able to put in place systems that can support that openness. I think I personally, I'm a huge fan of open practices, open education, open resources, open sharing. But I realize that I'm often in a privileged position to be able to participate in that way. It's something, there are plenty of power struggles that exist, and I think it's something that we need to take notice of, but provide certainly those structures and opportunities to allow individuals and departments and schools and institutions to be more open.
Yeah. Ruben?
Yeah, I think what Sharon and Ivana have answered, and also the question made me think of a few different things, because Ivana mentioned platforms as well, and how so many different types of platforms exist, and that students and staff interact with all of them. And digitalization brings a lot of opportunities for more exchange and more collaboration, but it brings a few challenges. This collaboration brings a few challenges as well, and one of them is about data and how we use data, because the more we are going to exchange, the more data that is exchanged along with the students as well, and that our institutions and our platforms gather too. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that's maybe not talked about enough yet, is that we need some guidelines and some agreements on how do we ethically collect and use this data, especially when students are moving from one institution to another, but also within the institutions. And another one is something that Ivana mentioned earlier as well, is the involvement of the private sector, because I think that's growing as well with those digital tools or courses that are offered by private companies. And that's something that we really need to examine as well. What's our relationship to this? Because if we want to be open, we need to make sure that we are doing this in the right way.
There are enormous issues there in terms of relationship with the big tech companies and the tools we use, the platforms we use, the integrity issues, privacy, whereas we go into artificial intelligence and big data and so on. That is the topic of a whole new discussion, I think, but certainly important. There's a comment from Manuel that it would be, how do we enhance authentic sharing across the EU? I mean, yeah, Sharon, you were commenting about a sort of an arena for exchange of ideas in Ireland. How do we get that to be a common practice? And maybe if we could narrow it down to how do we and at every national level in Europe make sure that there is a dialogue between the top and the bottom, the sort of the practitioners and the strategy policy people? How do we get them to meet? How do we show that the strategies and policies can help the practitioners, and how the practitioners' practice can then inform that strategy work? How do we enhance that communication and make sure that everybody is involved?
Wow, that's a big question. And thank you, Manuel, for mentioning the Irish context. I think, first of all, we need to think about really valuing the activity of teaching and learning across Europe. It's happening more or less in some countries than in others, but I think the first step is to actually value it as something that is worthwhile, something that maybe we can do better or that we can learn from each other. That was part of our discussion earlier, I think, in the discussion group, that you know, maybe some people are a little bit complacent about how they teach, or they don't realize that there may be better ways of doing things, or maybe that they don't want to feel criticized in some way or think that there's some standard. So if we can break down those sorts of barriers, I think we can have better discussion. The diversity of voices is so important, and it's not just, you mentioned diversity of voices from students earlier in the discussion. The diversity of voices is so important. And one thing that I feel very strongly about is that we are missing the voices of people who don't have the time to engage, or who don't have the opportunity to engage. I'm thinking about part-time staff. I'm thinking about people who are paid by the hour. So why would they join these sorts of conversations? Why would they bring their experience and their expertise to these conversations if they're not being valued for it? So I think there's a huge barrier to that open discussion. I think in order to facilitate it, or to allow it to happen, we need to ensure that people who are contributing are getting as much out of the conversation as they're putting into it. And that means valuing those activities. It means recognizing people for their time and effort that they put into it. But it's a huge problem. It's certainly a problem within Ireland, but that's extended right across Europe. So that's maybe some of the things I'm thinking about, but we do need to include those more perhaps academically marginalized voices, and recognize people's contribution when they do get involved.
Yeah,
Ruben?
If I can shortly add, I think what Sharon said is absolutely true. And you asked how can we make sure that those different levels and the people who are actually doing it and the people who are deciding on a strategy meet. Well, I think the core thing is actually getting them to meet. And then we heard earlier in the beginning of today's workshop that a lot of institutions already have a strategy or some kind of strategy on digital learning. And what core is also to evaluate those strategies and to evaluate the consequences of what we've been doing, both from a strategic point of view and what's just actually happened, and to see how does that influence everybody involved in the process, students, staff, anyone else. And in those evaluations, you need to include all of those people. You need to include the different types of staff and the different types of students to have this conversation where everybody is an equal and can listen to each other and share. And then having those people meet, as kind of happens in a forum like this as well, often gives tremendous insights. And that's really important for the strategic policy level as well.
Okay, we're just about up for time. Any closing words, Ivana? Has that given you any food for thought?
Maybe just one thing to add, and it's something that I've heard again and again today, and it's something that I personally feel very strongly about, that when we talk about digital education, we have to be sure to make a difference between the emergency distance education that we had over the past 18 months and digital education itself. It was not for those of us working in policy and working in institutions, the pandemic was not the first experience of digital education. I can tell you from the Commission side that the Digital Education Action Plan was well under preparation and almost completely ready in March 2020, and then had to go back completely to the drawing table. But the point being that we were already working on this before. And one thing that sort of worries me personally is that the pandemic was an opportunity in the sense that we gathered a lot of data and a lot of experiences on digital education, but some of that data and experiences are also going to be misleading because they were not digital education as we see it as it should be in the ideal case. So I was very glad to hear that reflected from many of the discussions today. And I think we're looking forward to going forward all together to actually demonstrate the true potential of digital education rather than just emergency education.
Yep. And if we do take comfort, I would say that the last year and a half, I've seen there's been more discussion about teaching and learning than ever before. Teachers have also, I've found, been sharing ideas more than ever before through Facebook groups and communities. Teachers sharing ideas with teachers from other universities. That hasn't happened much before. And a sort of common sense of purpose. So I hope that will continue, and that all the institutions involved continue to facilitate that and draw on that. Think of the number of reports we've had about how we got through the pandemic and student attitudes, and we've got a wealth of research coming up out of this. So let's see how we move forward. Therese, would you like to take control again?
Yes.
And we'll wrap this up. Thank you,
Yes.
Sharon, Ivana, and Ruben for the discussion.
All right.
Thank you, Alistair.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Alistair. So I think all I have to do right now is really to wrap up this workshop. I feel like we have so many things we could still continue discussing. And well, next time we'll try to organize something with a nice cup of coffee afterwards so that we can continue that in the nicest way. But in the meanwhile, I first would like to thank a lot, really, all of those who made this event possible. So all our speakers, our facilitators, our rapporteurs, Michael, Irina, Ashlyn, Ruta, Zoe, Ruben, Mark, Alistair, Sharon, and Ivana. I hope I have not forgotten anybody. I also would like to thank my colleagues, Gohar, but also Alison Marisro, who has been preparing all this workshop, and also my colleague, Gemma Fagan, who's been doing the whole technical part behind the screen, so to make everybody comfortable. So thanks to all of you. Thank you very much. And then I have to finish by telling you, just a second, I'm looking on my little notes just to make sure. See, Gemma is there and she has prepared things so that exactly that I can just say what's on the screen. Thanks, Gem. So I need to remind you that a recording of the event will be shared with you. You will receive it by the link by email. And also we would really be grateful if you could take a moment to fill out the evaluation survey. This will reach you through the Zoom chat and also via email. The link is already there, actually, I think. Yes, the link is already there. So thank you very much. Well, I guess all I have to do right now is to thank all of you. The work continues under DIGIHE. The work also continues under a few other projects at UA. We also coordinate another project on learning and teaching, which is called Lotus. It's about leadership in teaching. And we will also have our next event, which is a policy dialogue next week. So perhaps we will see some of you there already. And I would like to thank all of you for your continued interest and all of you for joining today. And I guess we can wish each other all the best and see you soon, I hope. Bye-bye.